Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely ecstatic to welcome Rebecca Oliver Mooney, otherwise known as Rom, to the podcast. Rom works at the Co-op. She's head of category for dairy, frozen, community buying and Brexit, and has recently spearheaded Co-op's incubator program, which is basically set out to help challenger brands work with the Co-op better. So I'm so excited to explore that with you today, Rom. Pre her role at Co-op, Rom has had an amazing training with some big corporates: Mars, Nestle, Kellogg's, Muller, Biotaful. I hope I haven't butchered that. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on today, Rom. I'm really excited.
Thank you for having me. What an intro. Write my CV for me.
Oh, happily. So kind of just set a bit of context, I suppose, for before we kind of jump into this conversation, is lots of listeners, and myself included, they're super early stage founders. And what we learned is that there's often a massive disparity between what the sort of the retailers need and want from suppliers. And actually, you know, if you haven't got the Mars training, or you haven't got the Kellogg's training, like what the actual skill sets needed to create really great, you know, pitches, for example, or how to actually work with retailers. So for us, to be completely honest, like we went into booths about 3 years ago, absolutely no idea what we're doing. We thought, oh yeah, get the product on the shelf, bish bash bosh, like that's, you know, job's your uncle. But we got kicked out, it didn't work. Same thing happened at M&S. And lots of listeners are in that stage, but they don't have that experience. Obviously now we've got back into booths, it's working really well. Lots of listeners are, you know, potentially they've come from accountancy, they've got no FMCG background. So that's just kind of like to set the scene. But I think what would be a really interesting place to start is, you know, lots of people think, oh my God, the buyer, like, how do we get hold of the buyer? Like the buyers, you know, there's this, oh, how do I approach the buyer? Am I approaching it the right way? And it can get quite, discombobulating is probably the best word. But I just think I'd love to know, like, what's it actually like for you, Rom, as a buyer? Like, what's a typical day or week?
Typical day, that I'd love to say it's all really glamorous. There is a lot of internal processes that we're always going through behind the scenes. I think it would be remiss not to talk about time. Everyone's really busy at the moment. You know, we talk about this time poor society, and we're right back where we were. We thought maybe we'd recover in COVID and it would give us some time back. But I think because of that, there's almost a pressure that founding businesses particularly put upon themselves of, how do I hit the ground running with that first pitch that absolutely cuts through, and how do I stand out around the many that you get? And look, we do get many, and you talked about the incubator scheme. That's one way of us recognizing that we need to work perhaps a little bit differently with some of those smaller micro suppliers that haven't got the experience or the knowledge that you've talked about from some of the bigger companies. Typical day, we could have a number of people emailing in telling us about fantastic products. For people like me, that's brilliant. I get excitedly giddy about that sort of stuff. I think particularly when you reflect on the 12, 18 months we've had, where we've got people who are in buying because they love product and they love food and they love putting different things on shelves. And, you know, we've got buyers who have done it all remotely. And it's, you know, as pretty as products are, it's sometimes hard to get excited about them when it's a picture on a screen. So I think, you know, seeing those products that are coming through, working through those initiatives, there's a balance as well between, I suppose, what we're doing in the here and now on a day-to-day basis, and also how we're elevating that strategic thinking. The two lanes, I suppose, of delivering what's right now for our customers, and what we need to be looking at to drive change now so that we're fit for future. And I think there's no bigger change going on at the moment within that shopper behaviour and that dynamic in terms of how people are responding to what we continue to term the new normal, but is probably going to go through even more change over the next 12 to 18 months as well.
No, for sure. We'll come on to that in a bit, because the landscape has just changed, well, post-COVID massively. And I think it'd be interesting to explore that. But I suppose first, what you said there about time, and pre this conversation, I reached out to listeners and like, you know, what are some of the questions you want me to ask Rom? And Copper Club is a wine brand. Momo Kombucha is obviously a kombucha brand. Some of the questions that were coming up from those guys are like, if you receiving so many like emails from potential suppliers, you've got all the internal processes, as you said, like you're super busy, your time. And as you said, Ron, like before we went on air, like you've got 2 kids, like you're homeschooling. It's not just like, it's just not the co-op day job. It's like Ron as a mum day job as well. Like you are super busy. What are like the 1 or 2 things that brands don't do enough that if they did would actually grab your attention? Like, is it sending samples? Like, what are you actually looking for? Because I think it would really help listeners with their approach to retailers.
I think samples are great. Samples are a shop window into your brand. And I think, now people are back in the office more. Being able to see other people's reactions to samples are always great, because, you may love something and you may share it with, 50 other people, and you might be a straw poll of one. So I think if samples are sent in and they're shared around the office, it helps de-risk some of that, because you get people's viewpoints and people's commentary and thoughts. I think, buyers particularly do get a huge amount of emails in their inbox. And I think the emails that are short, concise, what's the 1, 2, 3 things that are really important that I need to know that are going to make me consider whether this is the right fit proposition for a co-op shopper. So tell me a bit about your brand. Nobody's better to tell me about your brand than a founding director of the brand. Tell me something really exciting about it. And you can do it in really creative ways. You can do it in really cute ways, really memorable ways. But tell me why it's right for me. Tell me why a shopper's going to stand in front of a co-op fixture and go, of course I can find that brand here. That's why that brand fits with co-op. And then, understand that buyers will be going through a whole raft of emails. They will respond, but it's a timely thing. So the brief for yours is, the more yours stands out, the more exciting it is, the more engagement you're going to get from it.
Mm. No, it's so interesting, because that's why I love doing this podcast. You kind of reflect on things. But I've always sent in loads of samples of Manny Life to everyone, because I always think there's this like osmosis effect where you for example, say I'm sending you Manny Life, you may not like peanut butter, for example. You may find that taste, but if she said love it.
I love peanut butter. I said I love peanut butter. No brand favoritism quite yet.
But for example, say it's something you don't particularly like, but if when you were working on those pods in the office, if they're all going bananas for it, it's just going to help you make that decision. So I think for listeners, like, be generous with samples. I think is a really easy tactic to put into place.
Also think about how you send those samples in. So a jar of peanut butter arriving, great, people might take it home with them. A jar of peanut butter arriving with a different way of eating it, creating a snacking consumption, so the jar's opened and consumed instantaneously with a little bit of, oh, why have they done it that way? That's different. I had some samples sent from a drinks company recently, and they're launching a UK-based flavour and an American profile flavour, and they were all wrapped up in beautiful American wrapping paper and British and really took you on the journey. And I was that giddy 6-year-old child ripping off the wrapping paper, getting excited. I knew what it was. Spoiler alert! I knew it was going to be a drink. It was a bottle, but just that kind of excitement of it being a little bit different. I think maybe stretching how you bring part of your brand's DNA through how you deliver samples to buyers is worth thinking about.
No, it's so true. And to be honest, fundamentally, like, that's what on paper Challenger brand should be good at. Like, that's the creative side, just thinking outside the box. And I think that idea of, as you say, it's the first touch point with the brand's everything. So really spend the time thinking about how you send it in. Is really, really pertinent. But, and this is where I want to go to next, actually, and you segued perfectly there, Ron, but what you said, why is it right for me? Why is it right? Why is a co-op shopper going to go into the store and pick it up? Why is it right for me? Now, I think founders early stage founders haven't got like the bigger backgrounds, right? But they're amazing at telling their story. They're usually mavericks. They're very gregarious. They're you put Stu, our founder, in front of a room, like he'll have them, he has people in his palm, right? He's very, very good at telling a story. So there's that. They're good at telling stories, but what is the hardest thing, it's the thing that baffles my head all the time, right, still, is how to actually translate that into biolanguage or co-op specific language. Like how do they do that? So we've got a meeting with you, like what are the things you're looking for, like to tell a great story, but tell a great story that's in the language of the co-op, if that makes sense.
So I love stories. I'm a huge believer, and the reason why stories work is because we've been communicating through stories since the beginning of time, and therefore there's something intrinsically in us that hooks into it. And I think it's really important for brands, especially challenger brands, because sometimes your story is your real strength. So if you can tell it well, fantastic. Then there's the bit that you're talking about, which I call the so what. Yes, it's a great story. So what? So what am I going to do differently? Why do I want to do something differently about it? And I think sometimes there's this myth that to tell the co-op story in the co-op language, you need a wealth of data or insight or expertise. And I think maybe sometimes people lose sight of within challenger brands, you are your brand. And so nobody can talk more coherently about your brand and how it's shopped in that moment than you. So I think there is almost a bit of self-belief in you've got this, but just help articulate more clearly the so what. So from a co-op point of view, is it that you have a proposition that is bang on trend from a convenience element that will hook into why we know a lot of people are in our stores? Or is it something in line with one of our strategic trade missions? Is it aligned with our desire to be able to deliver local better for our shoppers all of the time? And I think if you're talking at that level, slightly higher up the funnel before you're going straight down, you're still telling that story and bringing people on the journey. And then you might get into maybe you have run some insight in a budget-friendly way that's talked to co-op shoppers. Or maybe you've got friends and family who can tell you why they would expect to see this product in co-op or not see it and what needs to change. So again, I think sometimes challenger brands need to bring that creativity and that passion that has told that story for their brand into the way they tell their selling. Really coming up with a clear, we can tell you why it's right for you. But being able to do that in a way that isn't about stressing budgets, hundreds of slides on a presentation. Don't show us all of your homework. We trust you. Tell us again that it's that bring us the big insight really briefly, and then open up the conversation with us.
No, it's so interesting. I think I've gone wrong on that so many times, because it's like waxing lyrical about peanut butter is great, but if it's not speaking in that shopper language, then you're trying to fit a square into a circle, essentially. So just for listeners, right? I suppose it's an issue with challenger brands. They don't have access to the Nielsen or the Kantar data and the big heavy data. I'm just trying to think of someone like some of the listeners who are literally kind of doing this out their kitchen, etc., or not their kitchen, but a super small scale. So they could be looking on the grocer for those insights. They could be looking on, like, where can they get those insights if they don't have the budget to fork out on Nielsen or Kantar data?
I've been really lucky to have really big budgets to write these sort of sell-ins and category visions and strategies, and also the privilege to do it on very, very tiny budgets. So I do like to think that I've learned where you can stretch and where there is data available. Look, the internet is a source of data, and some of it's right as well. Things like the grocer, Mintel, statistic, there's loads of types of information where you can get kind of an idea of the growth of your category that you're operating in the UK, wider than that. But I think also looking at how you can bring insight into your business. So it's not always about the quantitative data of Kantar or Nielsen. You'll have your own sales data. You'll be able to know what sells when. Is there any seasonality in it? We talk about what's right for us and overlaying the co-op element of it do you have packs that lend themselves into that more convenient format, and therefore you would expect to see a benefit? And good buyers, when they're engaged with your proposition, will help you go on that journey. So yes, of course, you need something to hook them in, but actually, if it's something that a buyer is passionate about and believes in, look, it's mutually beneficial. Everybody in the partnership wants it to succeed. So I think there's also a bit from challenger brands of when you've got that buyer engaged and you're looking at progressing it, seeing them as an expert as well, and really listening to the advice that they might be giving you, because they're going to want the strongest proposition on their shelves.
That's so interesting. So it's almost like bringing the buyer to your side of the table as well and do it collaboratively. I think that's the word collaborative is really interesting there, because, you know, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, there's lots of, and I used to, excuse my language, like shit myself. Like, oh my God, I've got buyers meet. Like, where do I go? You know, but actually, if you look at it through a lens of like, okay, no, like, how can we do this together to create something unique for the co-op shopper? So just, because I do think what you said there about don't bring your homework is really, really interesting about, you know, I think some of our early decks were like 32 pages. It was like going all Shakespearean, like one day a peanut butter brand started. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like cut all that nonsense out. But so say just for layman terms, and again, I know it's each their own, but if they get a meeting, they come up to listeners get a meeting, come up to the co-op head office, how many slides is a good ballpark? And actually, what do you want on those slides? And again, I know it's like it's each their own, but it's just any steer on that would be super valuable for listeners, I think.
If I could bottle an answer to how many slides, I'd be a millionaire. I don't agree with framing it around a number. I know people have, well, it's a 30-minute meeting, so it's 10 slides, or it's an hour. But it depends what you're putting on those slides. I know people that will have 20 slides for a brief meeting, but talk it through with the narration that actually you get to the end of it and you think, I didn't even realize you'd moved the slides on. I am a huge fan of less is more. I personally am a huge fan of having a conversation around it. So leave time for that conversation to flow. What I generally want is that wow moment at the beginning that hooks me in, that, yep, I'm listening. Now, before you've got that meeting, you've probably had a degree of that wow moment to kind of engineer the meeting in the first place. But that bit around, and whether it is your Shakespearean story behind your peanut butter is condensed in a cute and quick way. But that bit of, yeah, this is right. I'm engaged in this meeting. There's something that I didn't know, something that's excited me. Then there is a bit around, you know, why it's right. And that can be, this is the size of the opportunity, this is the market, or it could be, this is the growth rates we're seeing, or it could be, we don't have access to a whole load of data, but we've had online sales through the whole of COVID and know that actually this category is underrepresented and is going to be the next growth category. It can be any of that. It can be, you've got all these products on your shelf, but you haven't got a healthy alternative. And we all know, and you can easily look on the internet to get stats around the importance of health and well-being and immunity and all of that. So you're starting to bring your story in about why it's right. And then you're going to bring in that co-op language of why it's right for co-op and how you're talking to our shoppers, and thinking about, you know, people talk a lot about data and insight and how can I get it, but the best place to start is with you, because you're all shoppers. At some point in your week, you've probably gone into the retailer that you're talking to. And if you haven't, I'd suggest you get into them before you go and have a meeting with them so that you can talk with a little bit of knowledge. But think about yourself in that shopping mindset, because the Dan that's going in at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning to buy something when you're going to a meeting and it's healthy is very different from the Dan that might be popping in somewhere on a Friday night, and your basket is going to be very different because it's been a long week and you're rewarding yourself. So how would you talk to yourself at those different points on your journey? And where does your brand as a challenger brand fit into those day parts? And that will help you understand which retailers it's important for, which store formats it's important for. And talking about that shopper journey throughout the day can help that.
That's so interesting. So it's like seeing your product and then almost kind of viscerally looking through the retailer and being like, okay, when is this going to be brought? and like how often, and that would provide interesting, well, you know, as you said, the hook, that could be the insights that you need as a buyer. Because I'm assuming, well, not assuming, but I can imagine, well, for example, at Moneylife, we wouldn't have done that, you know, ages 2-3 years ago. Now we've, you know, had lots of help and we're more experienced, but we haven't even thought about doing that. We'd have been like, this is great peanut butter. Do you like it? Yes or no? Then you said,
if you play that through, so for all the people that are at that journey, that they are in that, this is great peanut butter, do you want to list it? If you rewound those 3 years, you still could have answered those questions. You still could have told me, this is great peanut butter, and people are consuming it for breakfast, in lunches, for an evening snack. It's healthy, it's tasty, and actually we're seeing an evolution of snacking occasions, which peanut butter's coming into, and therefore within this retailer, where you're really strong on healthy snacking, this is a great proposition for you. I don't know your data, I don't need your insight. I can make, to your point, I can make some assumptions. Your own brand, you'll know all of that, and that helps bring it to life. And then it's not, for a buyer, it's not just that jar of peanut butter, it's I can see how I would use it, but now you've challenged me to think about all these other occasions that other shoppers would use it for, and you've stretched your brand already for me.
I love that, because you said challenge me to think about the thing, and that is the crux of a challenger brand, is push those boundaries and think about different ways and usages of and occasions of your product. Again, just out of curiosity here, I suppose, what has been like your favorite pitch you've ever received from a smaller brand, and I suppose why? What?
I recently had one from a. I mean, in my role, I'm really lucky that I see loads of great pitches from loads of great people, and obviously, with our incubator scheme, we're setting it up a bit differently. We've also done things. We've run sort of disruptor days where people could come in and present brief presentations to us. But the one that sticks out was a dairy company recently. A company called Hesper, who make yogurts up in the north, sort of Icelandic type yogurts. And I got home to a cool bag on the doorstep, and just everything from the moment of unzipping the cool bag for me felt in line with their brand identity. From the information that was in there, that was printed out really easily for me to kind of read through, but was written very much in this is why we think it's right for you. The way that they create their product, their collaboration, their cooperation, kind of hooking into things that are very co-op. Their flavor profiles were kind of pushing the boundaries within dairy. So I was already quite excited by the flavor profiles. And then I got to try the product as well. And right the way through from the, as I say, the messaging to the packaging to the product, all hung together. So it felt as if I was taking on a brand journey with them. And I just thought, back to what we were saying earlier at the beginning, think about how you're sending those samples out, because that was almost an experiential sampling for me. I felt very immersed in the experience of it. And I think those pictures where it doesn't jar, it feels very smooth the whole way through. Every point feels in line with your brand. I do think life's tough. Like, we're all tired. I'm really, really tired. Anything that you're bringing in that excites me, that gives me that burst of energy, and pictures can do that. Done well, pictures can do that. But the ones where you go, oh, we're almost out of time, and you're still talking about it, they're real energy gives for a lot of people. So I do think that there is something around challenging challenger brands to be experiential in your pitches. I'm not talking being sort of up on the ceiling. I'm just talking about bringing your brand to life and your ethos and your company's DNA at every touch point.
No, I love that. And it's so, I mean, I've always sort of thought this, but it's like, I always say we're speaking to human beings, or speaking to human beings. Like, fundamentally, we want to be wild, excited. We're emotional beings, right? And I think there's something, a worry within challenger brand spheres that, oh my God, I'm going to go so far, to the left, i.e. so experiential, that I'm going to lack the commercial, gusto to back it up. But I do think what you said there is so interesting. Like, no, Rom it has kids. She's come back from work. This brand's on the doorstep. It's experiential. It's made her feel good, right? But I suppose brands are good at that. Then I suppose on the other side of that equation, which is probably more of the commercial side of things, so they'll intertwine in the deck, you know, how it's right for the co-op shopper. At the end, then, would you like to see, in a best case scenario, like an opportunity? So a brand would go away and say, we want to be in X number of stores. We predict rate of sale of this rate of sale. This is your total like revenue, and then this is marketing spend. Like, is that something that's going to really hook you as a buyer?
Yeah, I think it gives you, we're all looking for that indicative. You can come away and go, love this. Again, it's back to the so what, you know, can I afford to put it on the shelves? And you know, I remember when I was a supplier, people used to go, we don't have stretchy shelves. I was like, of course you do. It's true, retailers don't have stretchy shelves. We can't keep shoehorning things in, and therefore spaces like renting space, the product there has to earn its space. And so some of the basic ways that we would look at that is the commercial offering behind it. You can then strengthen that in terms of thinking about what else you can talk about. So it might be that your product has a great commercial package behind it, but also you might know that when people pick up your product, they pick up other elements to go with it. So you're helping us build a basket and you're helping people spend more in co-op. Or it might be that you do something great in a local community. So by stocking your product that is commercially viable, we're also doing something which is really important for co-op and for our customers, which is giving back to local communities. So yes, the commercial proposition is extremely important. There's then a little bit of, and this is also strengthening it. And again, with challenger brands, there are often elements of either linking back to communities or doing something a bit differently, or reinvesting in the future of people coming into the food business or education, or whatever it might be. Keep telling those stories, because that's what helps the product fall into people's baskets as well.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought about that, actually. Like, it's a way, for, again, I suppose peanut butter, but like we could say, you know, Money Life drives sales, but it also drives the sales of bagels or porridge. Like that's something really interesting, I suppose, for listeners. Like, what else? Have your commercial proposition, but as you say, it's like, so what is great, but like I also think a question when you're pulling together a deck could be like what else can we do as well, like for the retailer. No, I absolutely love that. So then, just on this, I think the best way to kind of move into this part of the conversation is, so you get listing, and as I said, this happened to us with booze. We're like, oh my God, clap batsman, this is amazing, products on shelf. And then, to be honest, we didn't have much experience, so it kind of just sat there, and then it died a slow death, unfortunately. Now back in there, and it's doing really well. But say you're a small brand, you've got your product on shelf, but you've only got kind of a small budget of, say, let's say it's $5,000 to drive rate of sale, right, and marketing spend. Where would you be spending that money if you were a founder?
I think actually one thing that I've noticed is challenge brands are actually sometimes better in this space. I think because they're so much more aware of what they've got to spend versus perhaps some bigger budgets that they try and sweat it a lot harder. I think depending on what category you're in, you might think you need to do something to drive people into stores. So what's your footfall driving initiative? But the other thing that we often see is great social media credentials and equity from challenger brands. You know, your customers really are almost something that you can pull on and use your social media channels to do that footfall driving bit, and then using that investment in store to really prompt that purchase. It's easier so we talk conversion, it's easier to convert people into picking up one of your products when they're already in store than to get them to make the effort to come into the store sometimes. So I think using that marketing spend at the point of purchase, or maybe a bit of redirection in store to go, okay, you're picking up a bagel, don't forget your peanut butter, or vice versa. Or even speaking to buyers to almost facilitate, do you want to do something more cross-category? So do you want to take a small challenger brand budget here on peanut butter, And do we want to see whether we've got somebody that we could talk to over here on bagels who wants to do some initiative together? So again, I think being quite demanding of challenger brands, thinking outside the box a bit more. How can you sweat that asset more? Don't just emulate the traditional marketing spend. And one of the things we're doing with our micro suppliers is really cooperating with them and going on a journey to say, you don't have to have all the answers. We've got a fantastic shopper marketing team who are really knowledgeable. So actually, let's have conversations about how you spend that money to drive that return on investment, because being really simple about it, we all want people to pick the product up if you're investing in marketing behind it.
No, I love that. It's a win-win, isn't it? Really, and it's absolutely a win-win. Is there any examples of like a challenger brand who's done something a bit wacky that stands out in mind? I'm just trying to kind of, I suppose, latch onto that creative part you were saying at the beginning. Is there any examples you can think of someone's been like, wow, that was a really wild way of creating some demand in store?
I think the strongest campaigns are where it hooks in right the way through. So there's nothing worse than almost trying to force that creativity and it jarring against your brand proposition. I think the key is around how you make it different. So as retailers, we all want to be able to offer points of difference to our shoppers, because that means they come and shop with us. And if we're all stocking the same peanut butter, those shoppers that like to sometimes go to other shops can go and pick it up anywhere. But if there's something in your marketing campaign that, as I said, using your social media drives them to a co-op, or if there's a SKU that they can only get in the co-op, or if there's a cute marketing campaign that they're buying into, a reason to believe in the co-op, those are the campaigns that I think stand out. And as I say, where it feels like it's part of the brand. You look at it and you go, I don't even need to see the logo to know what brand that is. And those brands that can almost stretch their brand ID in that way are the ones that I think stand out more on shelf.
No, I love that. Oh, and when you said hook right the way through, by that you mean, what does that mean? So
I think having the strength of belief in your brand, that you know what the messaging should be, rather than taking a message that isn't quite aligned to what you're doing with your brand. So if you're talking all about enjoyment up here, and then you're marketing it very much health for one small moment down here, even though it might be healthy, people are like, but you're the brand that I buy into because of the enjoyment and the fun. Where's the fun in this campaign? So making sure that your marketing is always aligned with what you stand for as a brand, knowing. And one of the best ways to do it is to ask yourself, customers, shoppers, to describe your brand as an individual. Who would they be? What would they look like? And that gives you a real sense of almost this brand persona, which you can anchor back to.
I love that. No, because we've actually got that. We asked that again, just thinking about this out loud. We asked that questions like, who would Manny Life like to be at a dinner party? And it just makes it, we always set up, the person who's, having a drink, speaking to people, like, having lots of fun. And that really helps us crystallize how we want to be as a brand. So I suppose for listeners, if they ask themselves that question, like, who do you want to be at dinner party, or like, who are you? It then makes making those campaigns, which is true to your DNA as a brand, because I think it's so easy to get pulled left, right, and center, going, oh, this brand's doing that, we need to start doing this, and getting worried. But actually having the balls to be punching what you're doing is super, super interesting. On that note, actually, I've just thought of an example. A guy called, I think it's Andy Walker, it's a brand called T-Rex. Like, they got into I don't know which supermarket, but he activated it by getting loads of people to dress up in as T-Rexes outside the store, and it got loads of PR, loads of press off the back of it. I think it was in the grocer, and it's like that. It's probably going to rent a few dinosaur outfits, and it created a ruckus. And it's like, that's, as you said, it's like making your money sweat, being frugal yet forceful. Is like it's the way you want to do it.
Somebody sat in a room somewhere and gone, we haven't got much of a budget. We've got how do we create a bit of, let's all dress up as dinosaurs. what did you do at work today? I went and dressed up as a dinosaur. But that creativity and that pushing the boundaries slightly wouldn't have worked if the brand was kind of sat over in a very area that didn't allow it to be creative, that didn't allow it to kind of go, yeah, of course you're dressed up as a T-Rex. You're T-Rex, that makes sense. But yeah, anything that's, and that's the beauty, genuinely the beauty of challenger brands. You can do things differently. You can push the boundaries. You can be creative. You can bring those bursts of energy, and that is something that should be harnessed by all challenger brands.
No, absolutely. So where I want to go to now, Rom, is specifically is like diving into the co-op now even more. I manage the co-op for Money Life, so I'm finding this conversation super interesting. But for listeners, your store segmentation is fascinating because you've got EC Urban, Everyday Convenience Plus, and Local Supermarket. What are those differences? I know that may sound just in layman's terms, like what are those differences? Because I think it could help, as you were saying at the beginning, like listeners should go out to store and say, okay, for example, you know, we're a bread brand, we're obviously going to do better in local supermarkets, for example. But I suppose in layman's terms, what are those differences across the store segments?
Oh, it's like choosing your specialist subject on Mastermind, isn't it? I feel like I step a clock now. Let's go. Let's see how I do. Let's start with Everyday Convenience, because that's sort of the biggest number of stores fall into that. And I think it's probably what people think about when they think about co-ops. So they're found in a variety of locations, and they're really about 1 to 2 day top-up shopping missions that I'm going to pop in and get a pint of milk, loaf of bread. I go in a few times a week. It's really handy. I'm stopping on the way home from work. It's close to home. It is, does what it says on the tin. It's all about convenience. But we've recognised sort of there's a Everyday Convenience Plus. So they're a slightly bigger shop. You're probably shopping for a few days rather than the next day or so. Their baskets, I suppose, have things in like we call scratch cooking. We're still not doing as much scratch cooking as we're claiming we're cooking. There's still a bit of assembly cooking going on. Frozen food features in there quite a bit. More traditional staple items that you would have in a small shop basket. So that you can still see the convenience element coming through, but the number of times you would visit in a week is stretched a bit more, and your basket spend therefore is probably a bit higher in it. EC Urban are located in busy areas, might be residential, might be city centres. They are the areas where things like meal for tonight, food to go, really capitalise in those baskets. It's I'm grabbing something on the way home from work that I'm going to go home and cook. That real instantaneous convenience element. And then we've got, I suppose, at the other end, the local supermarkets. They're in rural locations. People are doing main weekly shops there. They're the bigger end of our store portfolio, and that certainly comes through in the basket spend. And they're really important to a lot of our shoppers as well, because for some people that is their only option to be able to go and do a big weekly shop, be it due to location, their mobility, or things like that. So we're really always coming back to convenience, but different degrees of convenience. So again, from a challenger brand, if you've got a fantastic food to go proposition, come and talk to us about EC Urban. Don't necessarily try and put it in a local supermarket. Vice versa, if you've got a bigger pack, fill your fridge for a week opportunity, that's probably not going to fit in one of our EC Urban stores and get the sales that you want from the space as much as it would be in our local supermarket, or perhaps an Everyday Convenience Plus.
No, it's so interesting, because I think, again, that kind of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, is speaking in your language, right? Because beforehand, to be completely candid, I didn't know about these segments, to be honest. And I think lots of listeners will probably be listening to this thinking I didn't know that. So I think it's interlacing those different segmentations into the sales deck and conversations and comms with your buyer going forward is really, really interesting.
What I would say though is, again, I think there's this almost this balance between us saying speak our language and then not frightening people to not come and talk to us unless you know everything about Co-op, because you can build a deck and come and talk to us about, I've got this fantastic product, which is a drinks product that people are consuming on the go, on the way to their work all the time. And therefore we know that it would over-index in locations that are targeting on the go. That's then up to a buyer, a good buyer, to go, oh, I can put that into an EC Urban. So I do think there's a bit of, look, yes, we had store segmentation, but I think actually if you've got the right knowledge base of your brand and who's buying it and when they're buying it and how they're buying it, if you can tell us that in a simple, easy way, we can understand where it goes in our portfolio as well. So I don't want people to think I need to be able to understand this all the time. Just tell us how shoppers are buying it, when, where, and why. No,
that is so reassuring, Ron. I think because there is this like, oh, there's this kind of thing in the challenges zeitgeist of like, oh God, I need data to like speak so in their language. But I think kind of what you said there about come to us with the offering, and then I suppose we'll cooperate, literally cooperate and help you do that. I think that's really, really interesting. And I suppose on that then, because what we discussed pre-recording this was like lots of brands can go into a retailer, and they may have, their top 20% of stores that are really driving that rate of sale, but then they've got this long tail of distribution that's dragging down the average. And that's like a really challenging thing to overcome, right? So could you speak to that? So say, I mean, what the exact wording you said was like quality of distribution versus quantity of distribution, because I think everyone wants quantity, but it's not always the greatest thing for anyone, to be honest.
I get so passionate about distribution, and I genuinely can talk about it in a very understanding way, because I've sat on the side of the table where I've been trying to get that distribution. And you're right, as suppliers, we've almost put this in as a KPI, I will know if I'm successful if I've got loads of distribution. And so, people are going after this huge depth of distribution, but I've got a great proposition, let's get it in as many stores as I can. So I do talk a lot from this side of the table around the quality of distribution. You genuinely can have the same sales from 200 stores in the right stores versus 2,000 stores in the wrong stores. And to your point, if you've got your distribution in the wrong place and you've got a long tail, that's only going to shine a lens on, is this really working? As opposed to having it in the right stores, having a great rate of sale that then gets built out and built out and built out. So, we've talked a lot about talking in our language, but again, you don't need to come and talk to us in that language. You just need to be able to really help us pinpoint where are the shoppers for your brand. And then collaboratively, we agree that they go in these stores, and trust the buyers that they know where your products will perform the best. And again, you're absolutely right. It's that cooperation, it's that collaboration, and it's that mutual desire for this to succeed. So I've seen it from both sides of the table. I have seen, the push for distribution, and buyers almost being, well, I know my ranges. I know that this will work here. If you're trying to push it out here, it's not going to work. I'm all for healthy tension. I think distribution is one of those areas that sometimes stretches to an unhealthy distribution negotiation, and it shouldn't really be a negotiation about distribution. It should be, are we putting the products in the right places for the right shoppers at the right time? Because that ensures the best chance of success for both of us.
So it's just changing the lens on how you approach conversation. Because I think, as you say, I think the word distribution, it's like maybe a bit of an ego thing potentially, but everyone just wants massive distribution because that's the hallmark of a great brand, right? But I do think at the same time, if, as you said, 200 stores could drive just as much sales as 2,000, and it's just working through.
We need to change that lens. So who says that 2,000 points of distribution is a great hallmark of a great brand? Me personally, I think a brand that knows where they will have the best chance of success, for me, that's a brand that knows what they're doing and will do well. And as I say, brands that are doing well will only ever increase their distribution if it's the right thing to do. But I do think it's that probably one of the biggest mindset challenges. I don't know why that comes through so much, but it, as I said, I think we've just created it as almost this indicator of your brand is as good as how many stores it's in.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. And it's say then, to play not devil's advocate, but like say you are over distributed and your average rate of sale is getting pulled down by the long tail. What is a pragmatic approach, do you think? Is it go to the buyer and say, look, we've been given too much, because again, it's, as we said, it's like, well, for me, it's the ego thing. It's like the last thing you want to do is say, oh, we're giving away some distribution. We want less distribution, because that there's this thing as maybe we're working through it now, Ron, but it's like, pragmatically in my eyes, it's like, okay, we've been over distributed. Our rate of sales is getting pulled down. Like, how do you have that conversation? What was any like things brands can do if they have got too much distribution?
I mean, I'll be honest, it's not a question I was anticipating. Too much distribution. There's two ways that you can approach it. You can either do something to drive your distribution, social media drives, marketing, and look, shopper marketing is fantastic these days. It can be really geo-targeted on if it's a certain area. But I think that conversation around, look, we both held hands and jumped off this cliff with this distribution and this range of you, and it's not working for us, so it's probably not working for you, retailer X. What should we do? Because we know we've got something here, and we know in these stores, we can see the data, we know in these 250 stores it's flying, in these 150 stores it's not right. So let's be big and brave together again. As a brand, we're happy to take the distribution tail down if you are. That is a very pragmatic, grown-up conversation to have, because again, it's probably the right thing in that instance for your brand to have the right distribution, and we'll probably actually get to a point where overall your proposition looks better, because you're taking again, we've talked about that depth of distribution versus the quality of distribution, being proactive to manage your own tail. And then that's one more thing that you're helping the buyer with, because you've done the analysis and come in and gone, think actually we might be overly distributed in this area.
No, a previous guest called Mark Palmer, actually, he worked at Pret a Manger, co-founded Corson Press, and was heavily involved in Green and Blacks. And what he said, which I think to speak to on this, is he said loads of brands want to go from the Championship to the Champions League straight away without going through, the Premiership and working their way up. But equally, and I suppose Champions League distribution, but when you're in the Champions League, the last thing you want to say is, oh, excuse me, mate, can you put me back in the Championship? But like, no one wants to do it. It's like, but at the same time, it could be the best thing for you and your brand. Otherwise, you'll get kicked out of the Champions League or get kicked out of retailer X.
And that's the point, isn't it? By taking your distribution back a bit, you might actually become a better performing brand, depending on what lens you're looking through. And I think that element of being in the Premier League of distribution, because that's where all the big brands here that have been established for years and years and years, so that's what we're going for. But don't forget, these have been established for years and years, and we haven't seen the journey that they've gone on of small distribution, bigger build, getting it right, getting it wrong. I think it is that mindset shift of protect what's important about your brand. So as a challenger brand, your brand identity is really important. The D.N.A. of the brand that we've spoken about, who the brand is, where they show up, and being in the right places and protecting your rate of sale, because it's much easier to talk about going again, either be it in distribution or growth or other areas, from a high rate of sale, because you can prove that people are picking up your products. Distribution tails aren't good for anybody.
No, for sure. Now, this may be a bit of a tricky question, but I've got to ask this. So some of my friends and listeners of this have had brands that have gone in and they're just not hitting that hurdle rate. They're just not, and there's a delisting potentially looming, and some have been kicked out of supermarkets. And with small brands, challenger brands, like, this isn't a job, this is literally like their livelihood, it's their blood, sweat, tears, and that can be really mortifying, to be honest. Now, say that a brand isn't hitting the hurdle rate, what would be an approach to have the buyer to kind of save the listing, if you can talk to that?
I think you have to agree, a way of working and some principles up front. Yeah, I am really a fan of collaboration and cooperation. I think there's normally a little bit of risk for both parties involved in something like this, because as a challenger brand, you might be a bit untested in the retail space. So as buyers, everyone's saying, give us that point of difference, do something new with us. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be right first time and it's always going to work. So I think the relationship that brands and suppliers and retailers have together is really important. If you've got that right relationship, which is, look, we knew we were taking a chance, we knew we were challenging the norm, I think it's important to not just sit there going, well, I haven't noticed yet, I might get another few weeks out of it. I think it is those early conversations that go, is this performance what we both signed up for? Because you will have both signed up for it together. You will have agreed it together. And I think having those conversations early on in terms of, okay, what can we do? Do we need to do something to drive rate of sale? Have we got it in the right stores? Have we told anybody it's in those stores? What can we do that's quick to excite people about it? How do we do things a bit differently? And if that's still not driving the rate of sale, then you're into some conversations that's a bit more, okay, what isn't working? And is it something that we can change now, or have we gone too early? Or is the pack format not right for here? And probably broader conversations about what you can do. But I think you've got to have those conversations, and you've got to have those conversations in the right way. And, you said earlier about, the people buying from people, being human beings. We're all human beings. And if I was really cheesy, I'd link it right back to telling stories and communication right at the beginning. But that is the key to it. Just communicate. And you can't have all of that one-way communication, because you're relying on the buyer to know what's going on in their stores. They can't do it all for you, because you are the storyteller of your brand. Working together has the power to be phenomenal.
No, I love that. And I think the biggest thing I'm getting from this conversation is, going into this, and probably for listeners, is there's this like, not dichotomy, but you think, oh, there's a buyer on this side of the table and a seller on this side of the table, and that's that. But actually, no, it's about telling a story. That by telling a great story, you'll bring the buyer and the seller to the right side or the buyer and the supplier to the right side of the table, the right side of the table. And then it's consistently telling stories throughout. It's not just if things are going a bit Pete Tong and things aren't selling, tell a great story to the buyer, communicate to the buyer, and the supply chain team, etc. So I think that's fascinating. It's about
to the customer. So it is all about stories. So tell me your brand story, get me excited and engaged about it. This is useless because it's a podcast, but I'm actually leaning towards the screen as if I'm engaged in this at this point. Get me excited about it. And then I want to help you write it. I want to be part of the next chapter and the chapter after that. It's not a, hey, I've got my listing, close the book, put it on the bookshelf. And then together, how do we tell that story to the co-op customer in a way that we know that they are going to get excited about it, that they're going to want to come back and see what's happening in the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter. It sounds really simple when you sort of look at it through that lens. And I appreciate it takes a lot of time and skill and effort and energy. But again, that storyline right the way through it that doesn't deviate too far from your brand could actually be a bit of a secret weapon for you.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm learning so much from this. Okay, so we've got to talk about the kind of the incubator and the future of retail, because it is just changing so much post-COVID. So, talk to me about the incubator. What was the genesis and the why of it? Like with the early meetings, you were sat, I don't know if it was in Manchester or you were trying to sort of juggle kids and come up with the idea, but talk me through the genesis of the incubator program.
I think at Co-op we do a really good job of doing what we say on the tin. So we spoke earlier before we recorded, when I joined the Co-op, before I joined the Co-op as a supplier, I worked with them, and I knew the story that they told and the vision, and there was a bit of, are they really going to be true to this? And you don't know until you join an organisation. And at the Co-op, we really are true to our culture, our vision. It's our D.N.A. And I think, our vision is about cooperating for a fairer world. And I like to think it's not just something we say, we genuinely do it at all the touch points throughout our organisation. So it felt that we needed to go on a bit of a mission to support small businesses, entrepreneurs who shared that vision, wanting to support people who could help us get closer to what our customers care about. And we all know the importance of local, of being able to offer difference through micro suppliers. So we launched our incubator program to make us easier to work with in this space. Talk about the big suppliers earlier who know how to do everything. You have a very different conversation about somebody who's worked with a co-op for decades than you do with somebody who's just starting out. So I think launching an incubator scheme where we recognise that our role in it is to help collaborate and cooperate. We wanted to make sure that our scheme is underpinned by the power of collaboration. And I have a real belief that none of us will be as good as all of us together. And wouldn't it be amazing if we harnessed all of that? And everybody deserves opportunity. So we wanted to make sure that we had an incubator program that stands on cooperation, collaboration and fairness, makes us easy to work with, and a recognition that actually we'll learn as we go as well. So it's very much in its infancy. We've just launched it. If anybody's interested in becoming part of it, you just need to log on to the co-op webpage. There's a button on there that you can click on which says become a supplier, and you can register your interest. One of the things we're also doing is working with bigger suppliers. So I'm a huge believer that people want to be a part of a world that they've created. So we'll be able to marry up larger suppliers with non-competing smaller suppliers to help almost have a mentor program to really drive that ability to get retail ready, to have those conversations that you might not want to have with a buyer, you might want to find the answers out from somebody else. And I just think that's amazing that we've been able to create a scheme like that, that the existing supply base sees the benefit of it and is willing to come on board and help mentor the next generation of suppliers coming up through.
No, that's so I hadn't thought about the bigger brand helping the smaller brand, because I think again the whole thing of the challenger brands going, as you said, I suppose you did caveat this non-compete, but that's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, because again they've got the experience, for listeners I think that's so valuable. And is this part of this Range Me thing then? Is that where
so we've partnered with Range Me to facilitate, I suppose, the system behind it, that you go on and
right,
register your interest. But what we've done is we've partnered with Range Me to be able to consolidate the incubation scheme, but also it's now a way, we talked earlier about how do you cut through and the emails that people are receiving. So you can register, even if you don't want to be part of the incubator scheme, you can register all your details, and then when a buyer is going through a range review, Range Me gives them the ability to use filters to almost create a go-to list of suppliers that may be able to help with what they're trying to drive from a category strategy point of view, and then they can communicate to anybody through Range Me and start the conversation that way. So I think it takes some of the time and resource out of it, and will help drive sort of better conversations from the offset.
I love it. I think the kind of the nexus of this, ironically, is co-op, but it's like collaborative or cooperative storytelling throughout. And I suppose, the incubator programs are a complete example of that. Like, it just makes things easier. Like this buyer versus supplier thing is actually, it's way more, you're on the same page. You're in it together, because you both want it to work. Kind of maybe a bit too futuristic for a Friday afternoon, Ron, but in terms of, I don't know, it's changed so much, that retail's changed so much over the last couple of years. Obviously COVID's been a kind of rocket up that anyway, but what would success look like for you with the incubator program in 5 years' time? Like, what would success look like?
Success would look like that we have helped bring small startups to the market that are now established, that shoppers get to try products and love products and interact with them, and that we've created this cooperative environment where those suppliers that will now be 5 years on the incubator scheme, as well as the large suppliers, those suppliers that have gone through the journey, are also helping to bring on the next cohort. Success will be when people talk about it. They talk about a range in the co-op that is diverse and inclusive. And we can't do that without having a diverse and inclusive supply base. The incubator scheme allows us to really access so many more people that want to bring their product to life and to support that journey happening. And it's very easily measurable by the products that are on the shelves and customers being delighted that they can buy them in co-op.
Amazing. And I suppose kind of on a tangent to that, like, how do you think retail will change? Like on a macro level, I suppose. And again, I said it is a bit futuristic for Friday, but it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that.
I used to love questions like this because I used to go, well, retail hasn't really changed that much over the last however many years. You know, we talk about online and what that did, and now I just go, wow. So look what happened in the last 18 months. Look, we're talking about food and non-food products. We're talking about products that people will continue to go on and buy. There will be some behaviours, people talk about sticky behaviours. There'll be some behaviours from COVID that people will continue to buy into. I'm really surprised by how quickly we've migrated back into that time poor society again. Yeah, we all said we were going to hold on to some of the learnings from working from home, from lockdown. It just goes to show how the pace of life is still actually a key driver of our behaviours. I think what's happened over the last 12, 18 months will continue to put a lens on health and well-being. I think as a population, we will be more conscientious and conscious of what we consume. Is it right for me and my body? Is it right for the planet? Is it right for the local community? We're all still going to want a bit of indulgence. Sometimes quite difficult to get to the end of a Friday. And I don't see that going away. And I think actually one of the behaviours that we're going to start seeing people reverse out of is that willingness to compromise. So actually, how can we get to a amazingly healthy, indulgent product? Maybe not, but I think people are learning that balance actually is key from a physical well-being and a mental well-being point of view. I think the supply chain will be key to what we're working through at the moment in terms of making sure that we've got a supply chain that's fit for some of the current challenges we've got and fit for the future. And one of our things that we're looking at in the incubator scheme is it's not just product related. If you want to talk to us about a way to talk to our customers better or work through our supply chain better, then come and have a conversation with us on that. And then we've got this next generation, which are at the moment, the pester power that we used to talk about in terms of children asking their parents for those sweets in their shopping trolley is changing. That pester power is now changing to, is that product right for climate change before you bring it into our house, parents? Because as a young child, they're learning about it on social media, they're learning about it at school, and this generation is becoming much more vocal about driving change. So what we're doing now for those of us who have the spending power will need to be a bit different for that generation that's coming up now and influencing spending power and are only 5 years off having their own spending power. So I think we're going to see a huge shift. So what can you do? Well, you can accept that you can't predict the future. And I think, we've all learned that recently. But I think challenger brands that are looking at how their brand works now for their shopper, but also what they might need to evolve in the future to talk to this younger generation coming through that is going to bring different principles through, will be the ones that succeed in the long term.
No, that's fascinating. So sorry, just on this, on the pester power. Sorry if I said that right. Yeah, pester power. So what age group's this who's becoming more? Is this sort of what's the age bracket of this change?
So if you think about a child that's probably at high school at the moment,
right?
So,
okay, yeah.
You're talking 12, 13 onwards to probably at the moment 16 to 18. Obviously, some of them have got their own spending power, but those children that used to as I say, at that age group, the pasta power would be influencing what's in the shopping trolley, maybe from a, am I going to be in with the in crowd if I'm consuming this? Does it taste great? Is it, perhaps not the most healthiest product? They're more considered about what they're buying and why. So again, challenger brands that have a message around sustainability, or a message around doing something for a local community, or giving something back, doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing because it's a tick in the box, but doing the right thing because it's your brand's DNA. They're already talking to what's important to this group.
No, that's mental. I think as that's my exact next point, was as long as it's not a tick in the box, because I think that can be, well, with more with social media, with everything, if you're doing it for a tick in the box, eventually you're probably going to get found out. So it's like, it's got to come from the authentic self.
I think going back to that story piece, there is nothing worse than reading a story or telling a story and halfway through realizing it doesn't hang together. Nothing is more important than authenticity right now. We all feel like things are changing all the time, and so if you're continuously authentic to your brand, that is going to shine through. And for that pinpoint laser focused shopper that you're talking to all the time, your brand consumer who buys into you, they demand that authenticity from you more so than ever before.
It's because, well, we're living in such a like everyone's living kind of in like a plastic world at the minute, and that like the lack of trust or the breaking of trust post COVID, right, on a macro level, like people doesn't trust the politicians, we don't know about all this kind of stuff. Then you've got that on the one hand, on the other hand you've got Instagram, which is essentially completely fake. It's completely it's just not real. So I think there's real strength for challenger brands with those two things going on, is to be shamelessly authentic, and actually to not be afraid of not being perfect. And by that I mean not being like not doing good, but not being leaning into the fact that, like, for example, a founder posting him outside a shop is very authentic. It's literally taken, there's no like super photo shoots where everything's perfect. That's really authentic, but that will pull through as we navigate the next couple of years. I think that's these people consuming social media have consumed it for their whole life, and now they're kind of going, hang on, let's just look behind the scenes a bit more. And therefore, as a challenger brand, do what you say on the tin. Challenge the norm. Be the brand that stands up for what's right, linked to your brand, that authenticity, but also making people feel that they're making the right choices when they're engaging with your product. No, it's insane, absolutely insane, Rom. So just conscious of your time. So where I want to end, actually, and this is kind of, I'm asking this, scratching my own itch here, but I know it's for lots of listeners as well. So you've had this, insane kind of sales or commercial training with some big corporates and great businesses, Mars, Kellogg's, Muller, etc. Now, what I'd love is for you to kind of imagine you are a founder of, let's say Rom's Raisins. I don't know if it's for example.
Trademarking that shortly.
Yeah, exactly. But say you're starting a brand out. What would you say is the biggest lesson from your time at Mars that could help challenger brands?
I think my biggest lesson from Mars is how important the culture was, and I think why that's important from a challenger brand point of view is because your culture just does shine through your brand a lot more. I think that the culture that you create for people working with your brand, the culture that you create for people ranging your brand, but the culture that you create for people consuming your brand is really important. It goes back to that authenticity piece. You can't say you've got a culture and not deliver against it. And I think particularly, as I say, with challenger brands, where your culture is part of what you're almost standing up and sticking on your logo, that can go a long way when it's authentic and people do buy into culture.
And how do brands make that authentic, if that makes sense?
I think if you're a founder, it's why you set your business up. It's the bit inside of you that you're almost trying to get out and put onto your jar, your bar, your whatever. But I think those touch points that your brand has in the way that, you know, your marketing campaign, your social media, it all hanging together. But I think also those conversation points that you have with retailers, where you have an opportunity to almost bare your soul, which is the culture of your brand. It has to feel the same. It has to feel like I've sat in a meeting with a brand, and they made me feel like I thought they would make me feel, and that's driven by sort of the culture that that founding directors create. And the shadow that you cast is so big sometimes within these organizations that I don't think you should lose sight of the important role you have to play in getting that right.
Okay, so penultimate question. So again, I suppose kind of same question, but biggest learning from your time at Muller?
I think that probably the biggest learning I had at Muller was working with milk, which, you know, for a lot of people is red, green and blue. But actually realizing that people still get excited about everything. Back to the story you tell. If you can tell a story about milk and get people excited, then you can really tell a story about everything. I think it's finding that hook though. And it's finding that, you know, the emotional connection with what you're talking about, bringing it to people in a way that they can understand how they would use the product, consume it, make it easy for me to see it in my life. And I think that just helps with that storytelling element. And that's not always about having big budgets. Sometimes it's just trusting that you know your product, you know your brand, you know what shoppers want from you, and packaging it up in that story for a buyer to be able to go, look, I know that this is the right thing.
I think, yeah, so I always come away from these conversations and learning one like central thing. And I think it's the changing the dynamic from buyer versus supplier to buyer and supplier collaboratively working together. And what linchpins that together is this consistent storytelling across everything, to the consumer, to the buyer, to even when things are going potentially wrong with distribution, you know, going to the Champions League of distribution, or if a delisting is looming. Like if you're telling consistently great stories, or not necessarily great stories, but just constantly updating with stories about things, it really helps create that partnership. No, absolutely love it. So final question, Ron, and I ask this to every guest actually, what is the one question food and drink founders are not asking themselves enough, that if they did would pour gasoline on their growth?
I think it's very easy to just keep going, and maybe not kind of look back over the shoulder and reflect on the stuff that's gone really well. But also kind of that, it's that bit about walking along, not tripping up the curb, but not walking into the lamppost. So I think sometimes just taking that moment to reflect, to go, what would I have done differently that might get me a bit further up the journey later on? Even when things are flying, is there something I would have done slightly differently? The other thing that I always like to ask, whether you're a founding director, whether it's your own brand you're working for, it's got to be comfortable for you. You've got to believe in what you're doing. So some of the things I often ask myself is around, you know, what would somebody else think? What would they want to do? And I've got the privilege of having two fantastic little benchmarks for me, which are my daughters. And I do get a lot of insight from, how would you do this? What story would you tell? And sometimes it's frighteningly scary how quickly they get to, well, you just tell the simplest, easiest story, because that's the one we all believe.
That's insane. Ron, that was absolutely epic. I can't thank you enough. I suppose just to end for listeners, if they want to get involved in the incubator, go onto Co-op website and sign up there essentially, right?
Yeah, click the Become a Supplier button, and it'll take them through to the Range Me tool, and they'll be able to register there.
Lovely. Thank you so much.